Hola, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Flight Simmers. This is Viper Strike 95, and welcome back to another Viper Strike stream. Happy Friday, everyone. And today we're here in the beautiful country of Brazil. Today we're here to do a game day flight. The first of two this week. Yes, we're doing two this weekend. And we're here to talk about probably the biggest game in Brazilian football. Corinthians versus Palmeiras. If you guys aren't aware about this, of course, this is known as the Derby Paulista, featuring the two biggest clubs from the city of Sao Paulo, in the Sao Paulo region of Brazil. And these two clubs have defined Brazilian football for generations, featuring some of the greatest talents the country's ever produced. So we're going to be doing plenty of flying here in this part of Brazil this morning. So before we get started, I do want to say hello to everyone in chat. And all the workers, good to see you. I know it's been my first stream back in a while. I know that it's been a while since I streamed. Our last stream was all the way back on January 11th. It's been almost a month. And the reason it took me a little while for me to get streaming again was because, well, I had the flu when I returned back home from vacation. I had the flu, so I was wanting to take a break last weekend so I can get feeling better for this weekend, and I think I made the right choice. So that is why we're not streaming here today. So here's the flight plan for this morning's, for this afternoon stream, of course. We're going to be here. We'll be starting our trip here at Sierra Bravo Lima Kilo at Joinville. From there, we'll fly across the Brazilian landscape, and we'll make our way to our first stop here at Sierra Bravo Whiskey Sierra, the first of our two stops this morning, by the way. So that is where we're going to stop here first. Then for our second leg, we'll go and head on to Sao Paulo. We'll have a brief flying over of Santos, which is home to Santos Football Club. They play here at the Estadio Urbana Caldeira. This is most famous for being the club where Pelé played his club career at Santos. This is where Pelé played. Then from there, we'll head up north into Itaquera at Neoquímica Arena, the home ground of Corinthians, where the game's going to be held. Then from there, we'll head up west across the city of Sao Paulo. We'll check out the Allianz Park, the home ground of Corinthians. And finally, our last stadium we'll be visiting here as well. So from there, we'll head over to the Estadio Morumbi, the home of Sao Paulo FC, and then we'll make our final stop at Congonhas Airport, one of the main domestic hub for Sao Paulo. So that's where we're going to be this morning, of course. But I mean, there is a ton of sports stuff that I definitely need to get over, because there's been a lot of events happening in the sports world since I've been last streaming. So we'll take the Downing D840 with us today. Nice and simple, plain. We don't really have to do too much going on here. We don't really have to worry about So we don't really have to worry too much. So, a lot of stuff going on. So, but yes, we're doing two game day flights this weekend because on Sunday, of course, is the Super Bowl Sunday, and it would be wrong to do a game day flight without covering the Super Bowl. So I decided to do two different game day flights for the next 2 weeks, of course. So that's what we're going to do here. So for our first leg, we'll be mainly flying Initiative 1500. We're going to climb up to 5,000 feet for this first part. So we're going to go, and our heading's going to be 46 degrees. Now, if you guys want to join on in, we're on the Southeast Asian server. Do !point server. Here's our route for this morning, of course, and here's our server, if you guys want to join along in. We're going to be flying around 130 knots, so take anything that can do at least 130. I'm around 800 feet, so we're going to go ahead and make our way here. So this is the beautiful Brazilian scenery here today. So to our right is Joinville, one of the major communities here in this part of Brazil, along the coast. This Brazilian coast is definitely very beautiful. The coastline from Rio all the way down to Florianópolis is definitely a pretty area of the coast. Beautiful coastline here in Brazil, obviously. So before we talk about the Derby Paulista for a bit, I do want to talk about a little bit about my trip. So I had a really nice vacation. We went 11-day trip down into the Caribbean with my mom, sister, and brother-in-law. So we went down to the Circle Caribbean. So we went through quite a few destinations, including Aruba, Curacao, Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, Martinique, St. Lucia, and St. Kitts. So those are all the places I went to on my trip, of course. We had a really good time, and I really enjoyed our trip. I think if I had to pick my favorite destination for the trip, it was going to be I think my favorite place was probably St. Kitts, and St. Kitts was nice. Though my favorite of the new places was Curacao, which I really enjoyed visiting on the trip. So definitely a really nice place to visit, and definitely very, very enjoyable here. So really enjoyed Curacao, of course. But yeah, but there's been quite a lot of sport events that have happened since then. I did watch a bit of the national championship game between Indiana and Miami, the Hurricanes. But in the end, guess what? College football just had a new national champion, the new first-time national champion, Indiana Hoosiers, baby! The Hoosiers actually just won a national championship in football. Imagine asking fans in Indiana and the Hoosier State just 2 or 3 years ago, Indiana would ever win a national championship in football. You would be crazy, but they did it. Mendoza, Singeti, and so many others have finally won a national championship. It's very much real. Absolutely crazy. So Indiana football finally wins a national title. So that's massive for Indiana Hoosiers. Another sport event that happened, of course, is our Super Bowl matchup, and that's going to be on Sunday. And it's the Patriots and Seahawks, which I'll recap it again Sunday, of course. But this is not the first time these two teams have even met in the Super Bowl. They've met, of course, all the way back in 2015, and it was one of the classic Super Bowl matchups, of course. We'll talk more about the last time these two teams met, but it was an absolute Super Bowl classic, one of the greatest Super Bowls of all time. So that's not going to be our first time. We're going to be covering that as well for the game day stuff. yeah, the Super Bowl is really big. And then, of course, in other sports and in football and soccer, of course, since the last time we talked about things, of course, the Premier League's gotten pretty crazy. Arsenal's still the best team in England, of course. But there's not much of a gap with Manchester City, Aston Villa. Then you have Manchester United and Chelsea in the top 5 of the table. So, not really surprising down in England. In Spain, it's still Barcelona, Real Madrid top 2. But something really interesting happened, of course. The Copa del Rey happened yesterday, of course. And it basically, our Copa del Rey would be Barcelona, Atletico on one side, and the other one is Real Sociedad Athletic Club. So, pretty interesting stuff going on. So, a lot of crazy stuff going on. So, that would cover a bit about the news, of course, as of recently. So, definitely some really interesting news, for sure. So let's take a look outside for our scenery, of course, and this is absolutely crazy. Look at the scenery this morning with all the mountains and stuff in Brazil. Absolutely crazy, of course. On top of it as well, of course, we also have had some really nice stuff going on. Of course, we have our third stream Saturday. Our next stream will be tomorrow, of course. We'll be also covering the National Park Series. I haven't forgotten about that. And yes, we're doing Zion National Park Saturday at 1500 Zulu. We'll be doing Zion National Park. This was technically, we were supposed to do it the last stream before I left, but of course, me being Egypt, I kind of forgot it and mixed it up with Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas. So we're going to cover Zion National Park on Saturday, which will free up Super Bowl Sunday for an airliner trip from Seattle Boeing Field to San Jose International Airport, which is literally right next to the Super Bowl site at Levi Stadium. So we're cruising around 137 nautical mile, 137 knots, so we'll get there pretty quickly, of course. So let's go ahead and talk about our matchup. So you're doing 3 from now on. No, just for this week. It's just for this week because because of my game day flights, I can't miss Super Bowl Sunday, obviously. It always is on a Sunday, and it's the biggest sport event in the United States. But at the same time, I also didn't want to miss this matchup since Brazil absolutely loves football. They love soccer/football down in Brazil. They absolutely love it. So I would be an idiot if I didn't do it. So that's why I'm doing it for this week. We'll go back to our 2 streams a weekend schedule the following week. So I think that makes it pretty clear what we're going to be doing for the series moving on. So let's go ahead and talk about our matchup here for today, the Derby Paulista. This legendary Brazilian football match between Corinthians and Palmeiras, the 2 big traditional clubs in the city of Sao Paulo. It's between the 2 of the oldest clubs in the city, and it's one of the world's greatest derbies. They first met all the way back in 1917. And it's an absolutely massive rivalry. And they've met 388 times, in fact, between these 2 clubs, with Palmeiras winning the vast majority of the games, winning 136 of the games to Corinthians 133 with 119 draws. So this is a very evenly matched rivalry. And it's one of the biggest rivalries in world football. It's one of the biggest in Brazil, of course. They're also 2 of the biggest fan clubs in Sao Paulo and 2 of the most popular clubs in Brazil. So these two are massive rivals, of course. In fact, they've already decided not only state titles, the Paulista State, but also regionally and even national level championships. Plus, they met in the Copa Libertadores semifinals and quarterfinals, and which makes it a rivalry very unique among Brazilian football that has not happened with any other Brazilian games. So, the first match between Palmeiras and Sao Paulo, of course, came around in May 6, 1917, which ended in a 3-0 win for the Palestrinos. And yes, by the way, Palmeiras was not founded as Palmeiras just yet. They were originally founded in 1914 as Palestria Italia due to the fact that there was a massive Italian community here in Sao Paulo called Palestria Italia. However, they did have to change their name during the Second World War to what is now Palmeiras. And it ended up being a 3-0 win for Palestria Italia, thanks to their striker Caetano. 2 times of the champion Paulista 1914-16, Corinthians had been unbeaten for 25 games that year, and it was ended by Palestria Italia, which would become their most bitter rivals. The third match between the two clubs, of course, was on March 17, 1918. And during that game of the day, the players of Palestria Italia passed in front of a pension where the Corinthian players were having lunch. And they took an ox bone, which Corinthians is chicken soup for Palestria, on it, and shot at the refectory. Of course, Palmeiras took the lead. Palestria Italia took the lead twice, but Corinthians managed to tie the game, which ended 3-3. And since then, the bone has actually remained in the ox bone still remains in their trophy cabinet. Yeah, and this was only just the beginning of what these two clubs would be to begin with, of course. The first Corinthians win in the Derby was a 3-0 result on May 3rd, 1919, with Amario Garcia and Roviero scoring at the Estadio de Floresta, giving Corinthians their first of many wins in the Derby. In 1921, Corinthians, Palestria Italia, and Club Athletic Palestino were, at the time, the most winning team of the season, fought for the state title into the final rounds. However, only Corinthians and Palmeiras could end up being the champions, and it was a win for the Palestrinos against Corinthians to give Palestino the title. And this was the one match that considered to be the one that consolidated their Derby rivalry. Of course, in 1929, when the champion Paulista, the Campeonato Paulista, was organized by 2 different associations, and as a result, the most traditional champions were crowned by Corinthians, were the champion of the APEA, the most traditional association, while in the last round, which became winner for Corinthians. Of course, Palmeiras' largest win in the history of the Derby occurred in 1933 on November 5th on a match at the Palestra Italian Stadia, which was valid for both the state championship and the Rio Sao Paulo tournament that year, with 4 goals by Romeo Pellicisari, 1 by Gabardo, and 3 by Parato. They defeated Corinthians 8-0. The biggest defeat in Corinthians history, and the impact of it was so huge to the club that the club president was overthrown by the fans and caused some of the Corinthian fans to set fire to the headquarters of the club because they couldn't stomach being embarrassed 8-0 to their most hated rivals. Of course. Corinthians, they take this rivalry very seriously. In 1938, of course, but the big part of the rivalry started to really grow in the 40s, of course, when the newly built stadium at the time, the Pacaembu Stadium, at the time the biggest stadium in Sao Paulo, has first champion crowned after a Derby Paulista. And of course, in the semifinals, both Corinthians and Palestria Italia made it to the final, and with a 2-1 win, Palestria Italia won their first title at the Pacaembu However, the big period that really changed things in the 40s was during the Second World War. And Palmeiras Italia had to change its name from Palmeiras Italia to what is now Palmeiras, the name that's still stuck with the club ever since. And it was due to the fact of the laws of the Vargas dictatorship that happened in Brazil during that time. And it gets association that referenced the countries of the Axis. So as a result, they changed their name to Palmeiras. Of course, their first win in the Derby of their new name occurred in 1943 during the Campeonato Paulista as they beat their rivals 3-1. As they beat their rivals 2-0. One very interesting thing that happened in the Derby was in 1945, of course. And they came together, actually, for once, which is kind of ironic, considering those two, for a political cause. You see, at the stadium, Corinthians and Palmeiras played a historic friendly match that aimed to raise the funds for the Brazilian Communist Party. And it ended up being the Palmeiras win 3-1, and they raised together for the Communist Party. Now, honestly, it's definitely pretty unexpected, of course. Now, of course, in 1953, on January 18th, was the match with the most goals in the history of the Derby, as Corinthians beat Palmeiras 6-4 in a Campeonato Paulista match. And it was an absolute dogfight, of course. But it ended up being a win for them as well. For Corinthians. One very interesting moment happened in 1954. A very decisive derby was played at the Pacaembu. Corinthians managed to hold Palmeiras to a 1-1 draw and took the title. However, that would be the last time Corinthians would win the state championship for the next 22 years. So they had a bit of a title drought during that time, of course. And one such notable derby in 1971 was one of the greatest, most exciting chapters in the derby, of course. During that game, of course, Corinthians were harshly criticized due to the fact they lost the title. And they were going against an incredibly strong Palmeiras side, with Leao, Luis Pereira, Dudu, and their greatest player, Ademir de Guia. With 2 goals from Cesar Maluco, the Corinthians were leading 2-0 at halftime. However, Palmeiras led 2-0 at halftime. However, Corinthians came back stronger, tied the game in the 69th minute. Palmeiras was then ahead again a minute later, and of course, 2 more goals in the 72nd and 89th minute gave a massive win for Corinthians, a 4-3 dub. In 1974, in the Campeonato Paulista, Palmeiras took revenge for the 1954 championship loss in a very painful manner for a lot of Corinthians fans. And they absolutely smacked Palmeiras. Absolutely smacked Corinthians in that game, winning the Derby for Palmeiras in the 17th state title. And after the match, of course, Palmeiras supporters chanted "It's 21" to mock their rivals' 20-year streak without winning a trophy. In 1979, Palmeiras was led by coach Telly Santana and points favorites to win the state championship due to the fact they had a really good campaign in first phase. However, in a backstage maneuver by the Corinthians president at the time, changed the date to January 1880, and it interrupted the championship for 4 months. And it actually worked, as Palmeiras conceded a draw to Corinthians in the first match. In the second leg, Corinthians managed to get the win, paving a way for Corinthians to win a title that year. Of course, during 1982, during Palmeiras' long streak without winning titles, at the height of Corinthians' power, Corinthians won the Derby 5-1, which makes it their largest win in the Derby's history for Corinthians. Of course, Palmeiras still didn't win titles, and so in 1986, Palmeiras still went without titles. They still managed to get 2 big wins in the Derby. One was 5-1, and the other was 3-0. On June 2nd, 1993, Corinthians and Palmeiras made another match that involved the length and time drought for Palmeiras, which ended the long negative streak during that time by Vanderlei Limbaxo. And Corinthians got a big 2-0 win in the Derby, which put an end to Palmeiras' 17-year-long championship winless streak. Of course, one very interesting to happen, of course, was in the end of 1994, Palmeiras and Corinthians made another decision, and this time at the Brasilia Serie A that year, which was basically the entire biggest clubs in Brazil. And they played at the Pacaembu Stadium, and they reached the final of it in 1994, which ended up being, of course, a win for Palmeiras to claim their 8th Brazilian League title. In 2011, they played a very tense game in the state championship, and with controversial arbitration by Judge Paulo Cesar de Oliveira. Palmeiras played for most of the match with one player less. And it ended up being a big win for Corinthians. So, big win for them, of course. 2014, they faced off for the first time at the new Stadium Arena Corinthians for the first round of the Brazilian Championship, which ended up being a win for the home team, which in the case of Corinthians, 2-0. And of course, the next year they played it at the new stadium for Palmeiras at the Allianz Park. In 2018, after 19 years, Corinthians and Palmeiras decided to change the final again, which ended up being a win for, which ended up being a big win for Corinthians. And they won their first trophy at the rivals' new stadium too. And finally, for our last slide for a bit of the history lesson here. In 2020, during the COVID pandemic, Corinthians and Palmeiras met again in the finals. However, they were bullied behind closed doors due to the pandemic, which was the first time in the history of this legendary matchup. And then on November 4, 2014, during a matchup in the Neoquímica Arena, Corinthians fans drew a pig's head on the pitch. Because Corinthians' nickname are the Pigs. And that ended up being their nickname, of course. But Corinthians won the match 2-0. And finally, most recently in the 2025 season, both teams beat each other in the rivals of the state championship for the 8th time. And it ended up being a win over the two matches. It was a win for Corinthians. 1-0 in aggregate, and it clinched their first title in 6 years. So that covers the history of the Derby Paulista, this legendary Brazilian rivalry between these two iconic Sao Paulo clubs. And that concludes for a bit of this legendary rivalry. So we're going to go ahead and take off the plane and check out the scenery for a bit. Absolutely gorgeous scenery this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and descend down to 4,000 feet. So we're going to go ahead and descend down. So, but yeah, very excited though for this game day. Of course, this game is going to be on Sunday, obviously. Corinthians in Palmeiras. These two clubs are very, very popular in Brazil. It's going to be on Sunday the 8th at 6:30 p.m., right around the time the Super Bowl is going to go on. As for the State League, Palmeiras and Corinthians aren't even among the top two, actually. As crazy as it sounds. The top two teams this year in the state championship, the top team is Novo Horizontino with 13 points. 1 point ahead of Palmeiras. Corinthians are down in 4th, behind Red Bull Bragantino. Yeah. So definitely not really the greatest year for Corinthians so far, but these two clubs are absolutely huge. So yeah, basically football clubs in Brazil play in both state competitions and in the national competition. So that's what we're covering here. And speaking about the Brazilian state competition, Palmeiras have 4 points and they're second in the league, Brazilian league. And as for Corinthians, they're down 19th. Though it's only been one game. They only played 2 games so far this season. So it's still very early in the Brazilian season. So anything can happen, of course. So anything can happen for the season. So that's what's going down here on for the Brazilian stuff. But I mean, the scenery is marvelous here this morning. As for my plans for the weekend, of course, got some achievement stuff to do for Firefly Air. Of course, we got our tomorrow stream visiting the beautiful Zion National Park in Utah. Should be an absolutely stunning stream. And then, of course, Sunday, we have the airliner trip from Boeing Field over to San Jose, California. So, for Santa Clara. So that's what we're going on for this weekend, of course. So that's going to be our week. And yes, today is my 31st birthday today. So I turned 31 today, guys. Can you guys believe it? I'm 31. Even I have a hard time believing that. So, but yeah, the scenery here is absolutely just stunning. So, absolutely stunning scenery this morning, of course. So, appreciate it, Super Typhon. I know. So in terms of other streamers going on this week from the community, Murphy will be back on today, of course. He'll be back on for his Friday stream, New York to Washington, D.C. He'll be doing a flight from Republic Airport in Long Island, go to Wings Field, and then head down to D.C. to land at Washington's Ronald Reagan Airport. So check out Two Tone Murphy, an amazing friend of the community, awesome dude. Check him out. Then Saturday tomorrow, Allison Johnson's going to be on her live stream, of course, for another historical flight. And she'll be doing a big one, of course. She'll be flying from Saglek over to Narsarsuaq in Greenland. This flight is a pretty decent one. Wonder how long this flight's going to take. The estimated flight for this one is going to be pretty decent. So definitely check out Allie's stream. She'll be streaming on Saturday. So let's go ahead and cover as we head down this way. We're going to go ahead and cover the first of our 2 teams we're going to be covering here today. The road team, and of course one of Brazil's most famous clubs, Palmeiras. Founded as Palestra Italia back in 1914. This legendary Brazilian club is one of the most popular clubs in all of South America with approximately 200,000 fans, and they play both at the Premier State League at the Campeonato Paulista, as well as the Brasileiro Serie A, which is the top flight of Brazilian football. And they were founded by Italian immigrants in 1914 as Palestra Italia, but changed its name during World War II. However, since then, Palmeiras won 18 top-tier national competitions, including a record 12 Brazilian Serie A titles, which is the record. They've won 4 Brazilian Cups, the Copa do Brasil, the Copa dos Champions, and a Brazilian Super Cup, making it the most successful club in Brazil in top-tier domestic competitions. And they're also successful internationally too, as they've won the first ever international tournament, that was the Copa Rio. In 1951, they've won 3 Copa Libertadores, which is South America's version of the Champions League. They won it 3 times: 1999, 2020, and 2021. They won the 2022 Recopa Sudamerica, which is basically their Super Cup, and the 1998 Copa Mercosul. And they've also been successful regionally as well, with 5 interstate titles and 26 state championship titles. Palmeiras have been ranked as the second position in the CBF rankings of Brazilian football, and first position among all South American rankings. And they were even the first Brazilian club to win the IFFHS Men's Club World Ranking for the world's best club. And one interesting fact about Palmeiras a lot of people don't know is the squads for all 5 of World Cups and 2 Olympic gold medals won by the Brazilian national team had at least 1 Palmeiras player in them, which is shared along with their cross-city rivals, Sao Paulo FC. That's right, they had something not even Corinthians has ever accomplished. And you guys all know how great the Brazilian national team has been historically. Features some of the greatest players of all time in world football. So, in terms of nicknames, of course, Palmeiras are known for their nickname include Verdão, which is Big Green, Paraquito, because they're the Parakeets. They actually adopted the rivals call them Porco, but they actually adopted it for their own in 1987. And their full name, by the way, SC Palmeiras, their full name is Sociedade Esportiva Palmeiras, is their full name, by the way. But this is a legendary club with a rich history. There's no doubt about it. Palmeiras are one of the big clubs. They produce a ton of talent over the years. Of course, their home stadium, by the way, their home arena is the Allianz Park, which was built all the way back opened in 2014. This mighty ground Palmeiras hosts 43,000 spectators for football, and is one of the most modern multi-purpose spaces in the country when it was opened. And it is a 5-star arena. This stadium serves mobile events, not just Palmeiras, of course, but it's hosted many international sport events, including the Copa America in 2015. This stadium hosted a League of Legends tournament. Yes, they hosted an esports event, a League of Legends event. About 12,000 people attended that. They also, in addition to this, they've also hosted other events. They hosted many concerts. Their first event ever held here for music was the Paul McCartney concert in 2014. And many concerts and bands have played here. Coldplay, Iron Maiden, Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses have played here. And it's hosted other events, including it's hosted UFC fights, freestyle motocross, and more. But one really interesting thing about the new stadium, of course, is this stadium was actually built on the old Palestra Italia Stadium that was used to be in the site, which was the home of Palmeiras from 1917 to 2010, the original home for Palmeiras. So, definitely a very historic stadium. But it has some really cool stuff too. Definitely a very modern and ground, well worthy for the club. Now, one interesting thing about Palmeiras, of course, is their kit. And of course, they wear the famous green jerseys with white shorts and green socks. But they didn't always wear the famous green, of course. They actually originally wore blue as a tribute to the Italian team of their nickname. So they used to wear blue. After that, though, a green with white horizontal white band and a white with Savoy on the crest has been worn ever since. And of course, Palmeiras have worn blue many times over the past. But they probably wear the green jerseys for many, many decades, of course. And that's why we see here in the picture, of course, with the famous green kits here for Palmeiras. Of course, this club has a ton of support, one of the most well-supported clubs in South America. Originally, Palmeiras was a club that was heavily supported by Brazilians of Italian descent. However, that distinction over time has reduced, and the fan base is now today incredibly diverse, just like the city of Sao Paulo itself. Very diverse. Their largest supporter group is the Mancha Alviverde, the White and Green Steam. But you also have the oldest group, the TUP, among other supporters, and they are a big concentration of Palmeiras fans all across Brazil and even the world, making their fan base absolutely massive. They have an absolutely enormous fan base that goes all across the country. Of course, Corinthians have some major rivals. Of course, we know the Derby Paulista, which is by far and away their biggest rivals, Corinthians. However, they also have rivals with the two other really huge clubs in the Sao Paulo area, Santos and Sao Paulo FC. Now, Sao Paulo FC, known as the Chocaré, the Clash of Kings, and these two clubs were very big down into between these two clubs. It's also derby of nostalgia, of course. And these two are very big rivals, of course. And it's dated back to 1930, and the tension between these two clubs are very fierce. Actually, Sao Paulo FC is known as Chocaré. Sao Paulo FC is their big rival, one of their big rivals, the two big clubs here, and it's very intense, by the way. And it's extremely fierce, and it's very close, but in the end, Palmeiras had the advantage head-to-head with 121 wins to Sao Paulo's 116. And again, it's another big rivalry in Brazilian football. In fact, their two training centers are only separated by a wall. So yeah, these two are very close, and these two are absolutely huge. Now, Santos isn't quite as big. It's known as the Derby of Nostalgia, the Clásico da Saudade. And these clubs are very popular in the Sao Paulo state and feature the two most successful clubs in the history of Brazil's top division, Palmeiras and Santos. And these two are very big derby rivals as well. And they even met during the Copa Libertadores final. So, two very big derbies here in Brazil. But of course, I had to pick this one, which has ended up being a really good one. Of course, the club has a rich club culture, and there's definitely a rich culture. They have two mascots, actually. One is a green parakeet named Periquito. And their second mascot is a pig, actually. Gobato. Of course, believe it or not, in 1986, they adopted the pig as a mascot in 1986 after the state playoffs, the Campeonato Paulista. Although the parakeet is the official mascot, fans will refer to and yell Porco during matches, and the pig became their preferred mascot. And of course, the pig became their official mascot in 2016. It turned out they embraced the pig as the mascot, but they have both of them as their mascot. They have their own YouTube channel that has about 1.8 million subscribers. But of course, they have a club anthem that was composed in 1949 by conductor Antonio Serge, and he wrote the lyrics of the anthem. So they had their own club anthem too. I'm very proud of that, obviously, as well. Of course, this is a club with a rich amount of honors, and here's the honors for Palmeiras. The Copa Rio in 1951 is their big intercontinental trophy. In Continental, they became a major force. 3 Copa Libertadores in 1999, 2020, and 2021. And of course, the record 12 Brazilian Serie A titles. The most recent 2023 is their most recent title. As well as the Copa do Brazil. And of course, all their state titles, and there are 26 of them. Though crazy enough, they don't have the most state titles, actually. Their 26 isn't even the most state titles in the Sao Paulo region. That honor actually belongs to Corinthians, who we will talk about next. That's our next club we'll talk about. Finally, of course, is some of their most notable players. This is a club rich with legendary players. There are so many icons out of Palmeiras, but if I had to pick one player above all the rest for the greatest Palmeiras players, it has to be Ademir de Goya. He's actually born from Rio de Janeiro, and he played 16 seasons at Palmeiras. He had over 366 club appearances in his senior career domestically, though according to the data, he actually played in over 900 games, in fact. And he's one of their greatest players, and he's a playmaker. His nickname, O Divino, the Divine One. It was actually the same name that was given to his father, of course. But, however, despite his long domestic club career, he didn't have much participation with the Brazilian national team. That being said, he's still one of Brazil's one of their greatest all-time players, of course. Next player on the list is Marcos. He's another well-known player from Palmeiras on the list. Marcos became a major force for the club for their goalkeeping as one of the greatest Brazilian goalkeepers of all time, and he played for his entire senior career at Palmeiras. He played 533 club domestic games, but he's also played 533 games total and became a star goalkeeper and one of the greatest idols in Palmeiras' history. And he was also the starting goalkeeper for Brazil's FIFA World Cup winning squad in 2002. And he was a major piece for that, for Brazil's national victory, of course. And he became a Caribbean's icon. The next player on my list is going to be Dudu. He's their star midfielder, of course, from 1964 to 1976. He played for Palmeiras and was a big part of many of their trophies during the 1960s and 70s. And he was also a manager at the club, too, on quite a few occasions. Has also been the manager of Palmeiras as well. But became a star midfielder, of course. Then the next player on the list is Cesar Molako. He's their second, he also known as simply Cesar, of course. He was a big part of the 1974 World Cup winning team for the Brazilian national team, and he had an incredibly lengthy career at Palmeiras. And a big part for winning their trophies, of course. He's actually their second leading all-time goal scorer with 182 goals. That's because, at first, their greatest all-time goal scorer, Heitor, and he's their all-time leading goal scorer with 327 goals in 358 games. Born and raised in Sao Paulo, of course. And won quite a few state titles for Palmeiras during the 1920s. Then we have Djalma Santos, who was a very big player for the 1958 and 62 national teams, and he won 2 of those, and he's considered to be one of the greatest right backs of all time. And while he was known for his defensive skills, he also ventured upfield and played some technical and attacking skills. But of course, he played for the vast majority of his senior career at Palmeiras from 1959 to 1968. But of course, he was also very popular at Portuguesa, actually, which played the Sao Paulo region. And he played between those two big clubs. But of course, he's most famous for his time at Palmeiras, and he became a club idol. And in fact, Pele even named him for one of his top 125 greatest living footballers. So, absolutely a very beloved player for Palmeiras. Then we have Luis Pereira, who was a big piece for Palmeiras during the 1960s, 70s, and even played into the 80s as well. But of course, he's also more famous for his time at Atletico Madrid, but he still played a big role for Brazil's team in the 1974 World Cup. And he's considered to be Brazil's first and best of their modern center backs. Then after that, we have Roberto Carlos, one of the players that grew up in the 90s, Roberto Carlos. And he actually got much of his start in Palmeiras before he made it big in Europe with Inter Milan and Real Madrid. But he was a big part of Palmeiras's in the 90s. He was one of their big stars. And of course, we also have Emerson Leão, who was their second lead in appearances and one of Brazil's greatest goalkeepers. In fact, a documentary even said he was the third most impressive defensive player of all time, and he played for many clubs, but especially played for Palmeiras mostly. He, on two separate occasions, played for Palmeiras, but he is a legendary Brazilian goalkeeper, and Rivaldo are the players from Palmeiras, and there's their legends, of course. But so many players to pick from, of course. Brazil is a gold mine for football/soccer talent. It's a literal gold mine. Hey, Red Bear, good to see you. I hope you're doing well, my dude. We're in Brazil today. We're about to make our first stop here. We don't have that much longer for our first stop. We started here at Joinville Airport, and we're heading our way into Sao Paulo today. We're doing the Derby Paulista today, so that is why we're covering here as well. So that's why we are here in Brazil today, covering the biggest match in Brazilian football, Corinthians and Palmeiras. So that is what we're covering here this afternoon, of course. So big game here, and definitely a very big matchup, of course. So after this, we'll talk about the second and final team we'll be covering here this morning, of course. The Palmeiras Legendary Club, basically all Brazil's 5 winning World Cup teams have had a player from Palmeiras, which is a big deal. So we're going to go here, and we're going to land here at our first stop very shortly. We'll be getting to our first stop very soon. Of course, we're just about 149 nautical miles away from our first stop of the day. So we're just about 149 nautical miles away. So we're going to go ahead and get ready for our first stop. Sierra Bravo Whiskey Sierra is going to be our first stop. So we'll get here pretty soon. But But yeah, there's been a lot of snow since I've been gone too. It still hasn't melted yet. In fact, the best chance for the snow to melt will be, thankfully, it's 38 nowadays, but it's going to go down. But I'm hoping most of it gets melted by Monday and Tuesday. Hopefully most of this gets melted. So, now in terms of Brazilian League, of course, the Brazilian Serie A, just a bit of information about this league. The modern interpretation of this didn't start until 1971. Of course, their most famous team, of course, the most successful, we talk about Palmeiras. But the second most successful team to win the Brazilian title is Santos, which will be the first club we'll be flying over a bit. But Santos, of course, is the legendary club that Pele played for his club career, but also other guys like Coutinho, Pepe, Gilmar, and Mario Ramos played there during the 60s. It's one of the biggest clubs in all of Brazil, of course. So the top two are dominated by Sao Paulo State clubs, and then tied for Santos, the third most successful club, is Flamengo in Rio de Janeiro, the Rio de Janeiro area. Flamengo, and the most recent champions, of course, the Scarlet and Black of Flamengo. So, pretty interesting stuff, of course. There's definitely a lot of really interesting clubs in Brazil to talk about. Not just the clubs in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. So, we're going to go ahead and prepare for the first stop. So, our airport's to our left. So, we're going to go ahead and stop here for a bit this morning, of course. So if you guys want to know our next game day flight outside of the Super Bowl one, our next game day flight will actually be covered. Our next game day flight will be on February 13th, and we're going to be going from Brazil to Mexico, actually. That's because we're going to cover Chivas versus Club America in Mexico, the biggest single rivalry in Mexico. Not very often to get to cover this rivalry, but I feel like this would be a good time to cover football in Mexico. So we'll be from Mexico City to Guadalajara. Should be a stunning trip in Mexico. Very much looking forward to that, of course. So we're going to go ahead and make our first landing of the day. So if you guys know what I've been doing for this past week, I've been flying in and out of our new Firefly Air's newest hub here in Dallas, Texas. We got a new hub in Dallas, Fort Worth, which I'm very excited because I really wanted a third U.S. hub. It was really needed, considering our two hubs are right across the country. Pittsburgh, not far from the East Coast, and of course, Las Vegas isn't far from the West Coast. So we needed something for the center of the country, and I'm glad we got Dallas. Yes, it's a massive airport, but Dallas is perfect for a hub. It's like Dallas-Fort Worth is literally made to be a hub. And I really enjoyed my time flying around Dallas-Fort Worth. Being nice in the center of the country makes it perfect for a lot of the Dewey schedule stuff. So here we go, guys. Our first landing of the day. So stop right here. So we'll stop right here. So we'll stop right here for just a bit. If you guys want to join on in, we're in the Southeast Asian server. And we'll be in Sierra Bravo Whiskey Sierra. So we'll stop right here for a minute if you guys want to join on in. So in terms of some pretty big stuff going on here for the NFL season, of course, the NFL award winners for the NFL season, of course. So prior to this year's Super Bowl, the MVP has been Matt Stafford. Yes, Matthew Stafford had won a MVP for the first time in his career. It was Matt Stafford. It took him many years, but he finally did it. He finally won an MVP, and he absolutely earned it. He had an absolutely insane year, the best year of his career. At age 37, he threw 46 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, leading the Rams to an incredible season. Unfortunately, they came up just short in the championship game. Vrabel won Coach of the Year for the Patriots. Not really a surprise. Mike Vrabel was absolutely impressive for the Patriots, and now he's gotten in the Super Bowl again. McCaffrey won Comeback Player of the Year. Not really surprising. Myles Garrett won Defensive Player of the Year. No surprise. Jackson Smith-Njigba won Offensive Player of the Year. Njigba? Not really a surprise. And of course, the Hall of Fame was presented as well. And it wasn't surprising seeing Drew Brees and Larry Fitzgerald make the Hall of Fame. That leaving those guys out would have been absolutely stupid, leaving out both Brees and Fitzgerald. That would be incredibly stupid to bring those two out of the Hall of Fame. Luke Kuechly for the Carolina Panthers. My boy Adam Vinatieri for the Colts and Patriots. And Roger Craig. And Craig finally makes the Hall of Fame. It's been... Roger Craig making the Hall of Fame is a long, long overdue into the Hall of Fame. He was one of the big players of that 49ers dynasty. He was a huge piece of that. So, long overdue. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to get going here this soon, of course. Um, we're going to go ahead and prepare for the next leg of the flight. 89 degrees, so we're going to... We're going to be flying at 3,000 feet, so we're going to go here. So we're going to go here as well, make our way to the west. So we're going to climb up to 3,000 feet. We won't have to worry about that much longer, of course. So we're going to climb up to 3,000 feet. So but we've had some really great scenery on today's flight, of course. Today's flight has been a lot of really great scenery and stuff this morning, of course. So we're going to continue our scenic flight up here as we're going to climb 3,000 feet. So this one should be a pretty good one, of course. Hey, Court, good to see you, my dude. I hope you're having a great day. Give a shout out for him, of course. We're here in Brazil to cover the big Brazilian matchup in the Paulista State Championship match between Corinthians and Palmeiras. The biggest matchup in Brazilian football here today. So, of course, I have my Discord. If you guys are interested in checking it out, I have links to all the videos and stuff here in the Discord. You guys are more than welcome to check all this stuff out, of course. So finally, we're going to hear talk about Corinthians. The last team, SC Corinthians, Sport Club Corinthians Paulista, founded in Sao Paulo in the district of Tatape, and they mainly participate in both the Brazil Serie A, the top 5 Brazilian football, and the Paulista Serie 1, the top in-state competition. And this club is actually one of the older clubs, founded back in 1910 by 5 railway workers, inspired by the London-based Corinthian Football Club. And of course, they play in their famous traditional white and black home kit. And of course, their famous modern crest was introduced in 1939 by Modern's painter and former player Francisco Rebolo, featuring the state flag of Sao Paulo, 2 oars and an anchor, representing the club's early success in nautical sports, and play their matches at the Neo Química Arena since 2014, with their famous rivalries across the Sao Paulo region. But this club right here is one of the most widely supported clubs in the world, and second in Brazil, trailing behind Flamengo, with over 30 million fans. And of course, they're one of Brazil's most successful clubs, having won 7 national titles, 4 Brazil Cups, 2 Brazil Super Cups, and a record 31 Sao Paulo State Championships. And they also won the inaugural FIFA Club World Championship in 2000. They repeated the feat in 2012 in the FIFA Club World Cup. They've won a Copa Libertadores in 2012 and a Recopa South American title as well. And they're the most valuable football club in the Americas, as in 2017 they were listed as the most valuable football club in the Americas, valued at $576 million. But yeah, Corinthians, absolutely massive club. They have several nicknames, of course. Tamal references its naval elements of the crest. The Campeão de Campeões, the crown champion of champions. They're also known as the People's Team, Time de Povo, and the Alvinegro de Parque São Jorge, the Black and White of St. George Park. So that is some of the nicknames for Corinthians. Absolutely massive club. Of course, everyone that probably knows this club wears the famous white and black and white for most of history. However, they weren't always wearing black and white. Their original kit actually consisted of cream shirts and black shorts. However, back then, the choice of colors was proven wrong, as the cream color would gradually fade white when the shirts were washed, representing a cost a recent Korea club could not afford. So early after foundation, the shirts were changed to white, which is something they've worn ever since. In 1954, the traditional black with white stripes was introduced. It became the alternate uniform for Corinthians. Now, of course, rivaling their famous white-black kits is, of course, their unique crest. And unlike the kit, the crest went through many changes over the years. The first crest was designed by 1914, featuring a CP. However, the crest we know nowadays was actually introduced back in 1939 by painter and former player Francisco Rebello, to include a string, an anchor, and two oars representing its success in naval sport, along with the Sao Paulo's flag. And the current badge was made in 1979. So they have their very famous colors and their very famous kit, one of Brazil's most iconic and legendary looks. Now, Arena Corinthians is their home ground in Sao Paulo. It's owned, operated, and used by the team themselves, and has a capacity of 48,000 people, making it the fifth largest stadium in Brazil's top flight football league and the 13th largest stadium in the country. It's even hosted matches of the 2014 FIFA World Cup. However, they had to add temporary seats due to a requirement of having at least 65,000 seats for the World Cup opening match. So they had to add temporary seats to the stadium, of course. But this is a very modern ground, and this is a multi-purpose facility nowadays. It used to be football only. However, nowadays it's used for multiple different uses. Not just the FIFA World Cup. It's hosted games of the Summer Olympics in 2016. And it's even hosted NFL games. In fact, in 2023, the first NFL game in Brazil would happen in the International Series. And the first NFL game to ever play in Brazil was on September 6, 2024, between the Packers and Eagles, with 47,000 people, which the Eagles won that game, and they've now played. And they just recently played this past year, where the Chargers beat the Chiefs in Sao Paulo. But they've been playing games all over Brazil, and next year they're going to play their next Brazil game at Rio de Janeiro's Maracanã, with the Dallas Cowboys as the home team. But we don't know the visitor just yet. So Rio de Janeiro is going to happen. So it's going to be pretty cool, though. Very modern stadium. It's a very modern stadium design with modern LED video screens, a roof, and unique pitch. So, very modern stadium. But of course, one thing that is legendary about Corinthians is, of course, their fan support is legendary. Their fan base is finally called the Field, the Faithful, starred memorable moments like the Corinthian invasion in 1976, where more than 70,000 Corinthian fans traveled from Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro to watch them play against Fluminense at the Maracanã, as well as some of the biggest home attendances in the country. Integral to club culture has been their rich fans organizations, and many of these groups have established branches for fans outside of Sao Paulo itself, out of state, or even internationally. Most are also involved in the Brazilian Carnival festivities, most famously the Gaviões de Fiel, one of the most important in the Carnival of Sao Paulo samba schools, having won the contest 4 times. Yes, football supporters have won contest for samba 4 times. It's pretty crazy, of course. And in terms of rivalries, of course, and some very important ones, obviously, here, Corinthians have several big rivals, of course. Obviously, Palmeiras is their #1 rival, but they also have a massive fixture against Sao Paulo and Santos. The rivalry with Sao Paulo is known as the Clássico Majestoso, and has been around since 1935, of course, at the final refounding Sao Paulo after being defunct 3 times before. Corinthians actually have the largest supporters in the state with 25 million, followed by Sao Paulo at second for 16 million. This was a very big derby in Brazil with massive fan support. And Corinthians won the vast majority of matches, 134 matches to Sao Paulo's 115. Then their other rival, of course, is with Santos, and they both wear white and black, hence the nickname, the Clássico Alvinegro. Of course, the height of this derby reached in 2012 during the Copa Libertadores, which Corinthians won 2-1 in aggregate. But it's another pretty big game, of course, for their club. So, very big and very important rivalry for the Corinthian fans, of course. Now, of course, the Corinthians have several unique symbols over the years. Their official mascot of Corinthians is the Musketeer, a symbol of bravery, audacity, and fighting spirit. And it was taken into it in 1913 when they founded the club. And also Corinthians, and also the origin of the Musketeer came from when they were founding the APA. In the Paulista League, the State League actually only had 3 clubs, the 3 Musketeers Sao Paulo, and then they joined them as the 4th and adored Musketeer, the Artanaga, just like the famous novel, The 3 Musketeers. Corinthians showed their bravery, and hence the nickname, the Musketeers. Another symbol of Corinthians, of course, is St. George, one of the most revered Catholic saints in Brazil, with a mixture of blended cultures. And Corinthian worked for a lot of the lower classes and such. So, that's another big part of their culture, of course. So, tons of important symbols here for Corinthians as a club. And finally, for their honors, of course, Corinthians have won the FIFA Club World Cup twice, in 2000 and 2012. They won a Copa Libertadores in 2012, 3 Copa in South America for 2013, 7 Brazilian Serie A titles, 4 Brazil Cups, a Super Cup in 1991. They did get relegated once in 2008, won the Brazil Serie B. Yes, they were relegated once. Then, of course, they won the record 31 state titles, including the most recent one in 2025. So, very historic club, and one of Brazil's biggest and most historic clubs anywhere. So let's go ahead and do some more looking at the scenery, of course. We'll talk about the Corinthians players when we get closer, of course. We still got a bit of a ways away. So that is what we're going to do, of course. So speaking about the NFL, of course, the international games, the NFL is now playing a lot more games in our countries now. Next season is going to be even more games on the schedule, because next year we're going to get one in Australia, in Melbourne, between the 49ers and Rams. So we're going to have an NFL game in Melbourne. We also have one in Rio de Janeiro next year. Then they're going to have one in France. The New Orleans Saints and the Browns, I believe, are going to be playing at the Stade de France in Paris. I mean, it made sense they picked the Saints, considering, if you know the connection between New Orleans and Paris, they're both French. The French founded New Orleans. Germany next year is going to have another game at the Allianz Arena in Munich. And then the NFL is going back to Mexico in 2026. It's going to have another game in 2026. Then they're going to be playing at the Bernabeu next year. And of course, a couple more games in London. So we have a lot of different games here as well. So, pretty big stuff going on here, of course. So we're getting to be closer to our final stop here. We're just 95 nautical miles away from Sao Paulo, of course. So prior to this, we do want to mention about Sao Paulo, of course. It is far and away the biggest city in Brazil, and it's also the most populous city in Brazil, South America, the Americas, and the Western Southern Hemispheres. If you guys want to know how big Sao Paulo is, this massive colossus of a city has a population of around 11.8 million people in its municipality, but its metro area expands to a massive 21.5 million people, which is absolutely insane. And it's a pretty old one. 1554 it was founded by Manuel de Nobrega, a Portuguese Jesuit priest, and Joseph of Antonina, a Spanish missionary, founded it as Sao Paulo. And this massive city, by the way, played an important role in the Brazilian colonial period as an starting point for expeditions of settlers to territorial and economic expansion of the country. However, its opulence was then consolidated in the 19th century thanks to the Brazilian coffee cycle for Brazilian coffee. But it is a melting pot. It is a cosmopolitan melting pot home to the largest Arab, Italian, and Japanese diasporas in the world, with ethnic neighborhoods and with people from more than 200 different countries, which makes it extremely diverse. And of course, is the largest urban economy in Latin America and one of the world's finance centers too. Sao Paulo is absolutely huge. When we get to Sao Paulo, we're going to see buildings everywhere when we fly over Sao Paulo. We'll be getting there pretty soon, of course. And I mean, there are all sorts of stuff. Music, literature, theaters, of course. So, so, so we're gonna go ahead down to Sao Paulo, but yeah, it's absolutely a huge city though. Sao Paulo's got tons of museums, of course. They have a museum of art, a Brazilian history museum, the Ipiranga. They also have a huge museum of art, which is one of the world's most important collections of European arts. They even have a football museum down here too, at the famous Pacaembu Stadium. And it features a Brazilian football museum too, which covers the rich history of football in Brazil. So we'll be flying over plenty of these historic places as we get closer, of course. But Sao Paulo, insane city. And outside of just football, of course, while it's by far and away the most popular sport, Sao Paulo also has other sports too. Formula One, they hosted many events at the Brazilian Grand Prix in Sao Paulo, of course. And Sao Paulo's also got a very famous F1 driver, the three-time world champion, Ayrton Senna, who is one of the all-time greatest drivers. But also, but also Jose Carlos Pace, and Emerson Fittipaldi, and Felipe Massa were all Brazilian drivers who have won the Brazilian Grand Prix. The other sports that are very popular here include volleyball, basketball, skateboard, and tennis are also major sports here in the city. So, big stuff going on for Brazil, of course. So, we're flying along the Brazilian coast. So, we could definitely fly on the beautiful coastline here in Brazil. So, we'll be arriving to Santos very soon, of course. We don't have too much far left to go. So, I'm going to cover the last slide for today. And our final slide is the players that have played for Corinthians, of course. And they've had some legendary players over the years, of course. Of legendary talent and players over the years. So in terms of the players, so there are many legendary players for the team, but the first part I want to put on top of the list is Revelinero. Considered to be one of the greatest left field midfielders of all time, and he was a big member of both the 1970 and 1974 teams, with 92 caps for the Brazilian national team, of course. But he is considered to be one of the all-time great players. But he is one of the greatest players of all time, of course. In fact, he was named by Pele to be one of the greatest living players. And he was even an inspiration for Diego Maradona. And his moves and techniques have inspired many more players for years to come, of course. And he played from 1965 to 1974. Definitely one of Corinthians' greatest players. The next one on the list is Socrates, of course. Now, don't confuse him for the Greek. Don't confuse him for the Greek philosopher. Socrates is one of Brazil's most legendary players. He's recognizable for his beard and headband. He symbolized a whole generation of cool for football supporters. He's one of the 100 greatest living players by Pele in 2004. One of the greatest midfielders of all time, and he played for the Brazil national team for 7 years. And captained the team of the 1982 World Cup, what considered to be one of the greatest Brazilian teams of all time. But he became an icon for Corinthians from 1978 to 1984. And he with 172 goals, and he was especially important not only during his club career, but he was a big part of Corinthians during their years with the Corinthians democracy, one of the big parts of Corinthians history, of course, when they defied against the military regime of Brazil at the time. But he was one of the big leaders for the club, of course. One of their greatest players. Next is Claudio, of course. Claudio is the all-time leading scorer for Corinthians with 306 goals in 554 games, and he's the third greatest player in club history. It was a big part of Corinthians' success in the 1950s. Big major player for Brazil. Then the next part on the list is Neco. And he was the first Iowa Corinthians, being the player to get his first player with a statue in the team. And he's also the player who's played for Corinthians the longest, 17 years for the club, and was a big part of Corinthians' history, and won the state title league 8 times as a player. And he also won Brazil 2 South American championships for the national team as well. Then after that, of course, is Lucinino, and played for his entire career from 1949 to 1967 with Corinthians, and won 3 state championships in 1951, 52, and 1954. Some people even consider him to be the greatest player of all time for Corinthians. Then after that, Marcelino Caracoa. Marcelino Caracoa, of course. Another well-known player known as Angel Foot, the most successful player to ever play for the club. 206 goals in 420 matches from 1994 to 2001. And he's collected more trophies with Corinthians than any other player in their history, in fact. A total of 8 championships, including the 1998 and 1999 national championships and the Club World Cup in 2000. And then, of course, we have Ronaldo Giovanelli, and, of course, there are many more legendary players that played for Corinthians. So that covers our final slide about Corinthians, of course. We're going to go briefly and get over to Santos, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and descend down so we can get to Santos, of course. Santos will be our next place we'll be flying over. So that covers a bit about Corinthians. A legendary club with a legendary history, of course. So that covers the legendary Brazilian club, Corinthians. So that's it, everyone, for the last slide for today. We're going to go ahead and head on down, of course. So Santos, the city of Santos, was actually founded 2 years after Sao Paulo's founding. It was founded by the Portuguese nobleman Brás Cubas. It's actually on an island on São Vicente, which harbors both the city of Santos and city of São Vicente. Its population around 440,000 people. It's home to the Coffee Museum, where world coffee prices were once negotiated at. And, of course, a football memorial, which honors Pelé, who played his vast majority of his career at Santos Football Club. And it also features the longest beachfront garden in the world, which is about 5,834 yards. So we'll arrive here at the city of Santos soon. So we'll get to there pretty soon, obviously. So this here, of course, we'll be making our way to Praia Grande. So we'll be making here pretty soon. So we're just 60 nautical miles from our final stop. So once we go here into Santos, we'll climb up to 4,000 feet for the rest of the trip. We'll climb around 3,500 feet. Or 4,000. Just to get above the buildings, probably. Ah, the beautiful coast. Isn't that just gorgeous? But guys, thank you all so much for coming here today's stream. I really do appreciate all you guys showing up. As always, your support means a lot to me, so I really do appreciate it for all of us. Now, crazy thing here, of course, about the Brazilian team, the Brazilian league. In terms of relegation, by the way, from the Brazilian league, in fact, the only clubs that have never been relegated from Brazil's top flight are Flamengo and Sao Paulo FC have never been relegated from Brazil's top flight. Santos was once relegated in 2023. Palmeiras actually got relegated twice from Brazil's top flight in 2002 and 2012. And Corinthians were once relegated back in 2007, were infamously relegated, which have never been relegated since. So, definitely some interesting history of Brazil's teams, of course. And usually there is this thing called the Big 12 of Brazilian football, which is Brazil's Big 12 clubs, by the way. Their Big 12 consist of Atlético Mineiro, Botafogo, Corinthians, Cruzeiro. Cruzeiro is, of course, Belo Horizonte. Flamengo, Fluminense, Grêmio, Sport Club International, Palmeiras, Santos, Sao Paulo FC, and Vasco da Gama in Rio. So that is the Big 12. Of Brazilian football. So, like I said, lots of traditions here in Brazil, of course. So, over here, guys, is the city of Santos. So here we go, guys. The city of Santos. And we'll fly over the stadium where Pele played for the majority of his career. At Santos's legendary ground, the Villa Belmiro. And it's pretty small, actually. It's smaller than you think. It's 16,000 people. Its record attendance was only 31,000. It's a very, very small stadium. So here is Santos, by the way, here in Brazil. So here's the stadium to our left. This is Santos FC's ground. I know there's no photogrammetry here. Yeah, you can see this beautiful coast, of course. I guess we're going to climb up to 4,000 then. Let's go 3,500. Yeah, there's the stadium, of course, the beautiful city of Santos in the background. Now we're going to climb our way up to Sao Paulo, of course. So we're going to climb up. And we're going to make our way down over to Corinthians' home ground at the Neoquímica Arena. So, a lot of stuff going on here today, of course. So once we get done, we'll probably find someone to raid. So here we are, guys. We're about to reach the beautiful city of Sao Paulo. Way up ahead, of course. So here we go, guys. We're about to reach Sao Paulo. But yeah, this metropolis is absolutely huge. Now, the airport we'll be landing is actually at the Congonhas Airport. There's quite a few airports here in the city. Congonhas is the main domestic airport, and it serves a lot of the domestic flights and regional flights in Sao Paulo. Then you have the larger Gargalhos Airport for the international flights. It's the international flights in the national hub is at Guarulhos Airport. And Congonhas is more for domestic and regional flights. So it's similar to Rio de Janeiro, with Galileo being for international flights to Rio de Janeiro, and in Santos Dumont for more than regional flights. So, definitely some pretty interesting stuff going on here for the flights. So, some really interesting stuff going on, of course, with the flights. So, Sao Paulo should be coming here very shortly, of course. So, we should. So here, guys, we're getting closer here to our of course, when you're looking at Brazilian stadiums, by the way, for my research, of course, the largest stadium in the Brazilian league is in the Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro, with 73,000 people. Then, of course, the largest stadium in Sao Paulo is the Morumbi, BIS, with around 67,000. So, yeah, this is Sao Paulo, everyone. We're about to reach the massive city of Sao Paulo. So, big city, of course. So I think we're about to arrive into Corinthians' home ground, the Neo Quinnica Arena. So here it is, guys. The whole arena of Corinthians. Dead ahead. Neo Quinnica Arena. Home ground or Corinthians. So here it is, guys. Now we're going to fly into downtown. Yeah, this city is about as big as you think this city really is. So here we go, guys. We're going to drop down to... But yes, this city is about as big as you guys think this is. This is an absolutely enormous city. It's the Tokyo of South America. Or maybe the Beijing or Shanghai. Whatever massive city you can think of course. Six, seven. Yeah, this city is humongous. Yeah, it is. It's got skyscrapers everywhere, and everything's so packed into this city. It's definitely huge. It's just crazy how big this city is. See if anyone's following along here. There's someone at Kangahas, but it's an ATR, of course. I hope the ATR stuff works for Flight Sim. So, So here we go, guys. We're about to arrive into Corinthians' home ground, the Allianz Park. But yeah, it's just crazy. This city is so built up. It's large in the Americas, followed by Lima, correct? Lima, Mexico City, and New York City. Those are the top 4 biggest cities in the Americas. That's absolutely correct. So the Allianz Park should be dead ahead of us. The home ground of the mighty Palmeiras. So there it is. So there it is. The Allianz Park, home of Palmeiras. Hello? So we're going to go to the football museum. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. Yeah, Toronto's only 11th. I know, that's crazy. See, Toronto, it's not even the biggest city. There's so many Latin American cities that are just absolutely massive. In Latin America, there's so many really big cities. So here it is, guys. This is the largest stadium in Sao Paulo, the Estadio Morumbi. And that's the home of Sao Paulo FC. It's also known as the Morumbi. This is the Morumbi. So that is the largest stadium in Sao Paulo. 67,000 in an all-seat configuration. But its record attendance, however, is double that. 146,000 people once attended a game at the Morumbi. And it was Corinthians versus Ponte Preta in 1977. 146,000. Do you even want to know how much 146,000 is? It's called a ton of people. It's not even the largest attended game in Brazilian football. The Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro once had a record attendance of 173,000 people in a game, which is its record attendance, by the way. But in the highest attendance ever, though, was 190,000 people which was a 1963, a record 194,000 people attended a match between Flamengo and Fluminense. Yeah, 194,000 people. That's basically the entire population of Cape Coral, Florida, attending the match. Or as much as the little city of Little Rock once had a population of 194,000. It's a mid-level city in the United States. Yeah, imagine that all attending a football match in Rio de Janeiro. It's crazy. So we're about to make our final stop here at the Congas Airport. We're about to make our final stop here. So here we go, guys. Final landing. I've done a few takeoffs and lanes here from this airport. Very tricky airport here in Brazil. Of course, Brazilian airports have always been pretty tricky. This one's no different. Congas has had more than a few accidents over the years. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that the runways here are very short. Its longest runway is almost 6,200 feet of runways. It's fine if it's GA, general aviation. That's one thing. But an airliner, especially one full of people, that's not a lot of space. So we're gonna go park, and we'll wrap everything up here. Thank you all so much for coming here today for this fine stream here in Brazil at the beautiful Congas Airport. Just in time for the Derby Paulista, the big rivalry matchup of Brazilian football. So, guys, thank you a ton for being here as always. So we'll be back tomorrow morning in Nevada. We'll be getting ready to go to Zion National Park. So we're gonna go ahead and raid. We're gonna raid, of course, for London Controller. I want to raid him. I haven't raided London Controller in a bit, so we're gonna raid his stream. So guys, I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone, and have a great start to your all's weekend. Take care, everyone, and see you all very soon. Have a fantastic rest of your day.